The Director-General of the BBC and its head of news have resigned. The resignations come as the British broadcaster is facing criticism of a bias in its coverage of several issues, including the war in Gaza, the trans rights and Donald Trump. BBC's Director-General Tim Davie and head of news Deborah Tarnes resigned after accusations that a documentary by its flagship Panorama program had edited a speech by Trump in a misleading way. After resigning, Deborah Tarnes said that BBC News is not institutionally biased.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
BBC Chair Samir Shah has apologized and said that the editing of the Trump documentary was an error of judgment. Reacting to the news, Trump said that corrupt journalists have been exposed, adding these are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. The White House had recently denounced the broadcaster for propaganda machine and 100% fake news. During the documentary broadcast last year, the doctored clip combined two separate parts of Trump's speech from January 6, 2021. It gave the impression that Trump urged his supporters to fight like hell after the Capitol riots. The part where Trump asked his supporters to protest peacefully and patriotically was omitted. Trump had actually said they would cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had recently denounced the broadcaster as a propagandist machine. The BBC had been under mounting pressure after an internal report by a former standards advisor was leaked to the Daily Telegraph newspaper. The leaked memo came from Michael Prescott, a former independent external advisor to the broadcaster's editorial standards committee. He left the role in June. Apart from the Panorama documentary, Prescott raised concerns about a lack of action to address systemic problems of bias in BBC Arabic's coverage of the Israel-Gaza war. Reports also said Prescott raised concerns about the BBC's coverage around trans issues. A parliamentary select committee had set a Monday deadline for the BBC to respond to the claims.
I think that the dossier from Michael Prescott has got some things in it that are right and some things that I think are wrong. But within it, the problem areas, I think, are, first of all, the Trump documentary and the edit, which doesn't seem to be defensible. Secondly, most BBC executives I've talked to over the years think BBC Arabic does need a very close eye kept on it. And whether that's been absolutely at the BBC standard, I think, is in some doubt. Then also, there are wider issues about, did the BBC go too far in a direction of the trans lobby?
The departures of Davie and Tarnes appear to be an attempt to protect the BBC from further attacks. Davie, who has led the British Broadcasting Corporation since 2020, said he decided to leave after reflecting on the very intense personal and professional demands of managing this role over many years in these febrile times. Ollie Barrett is now joining us live from London. Ollie Barrett, good to see you. BBC Chair says that he has apologized and said that the editing of the Trump documentary was an error of judgment. So what happens next for the BBC? What's the next course of action?
That's right. People are now poring over that letter that's been provided by the BBC Chair, Samir Shah, to a parliamentary committee at Westminster, in which he does acknowledge, as you say, an error of judgment with regards to the editing in that Panorama documentary. He does also, though, mount a defence in some ways of the BBC, saying that it is not true, he claims, that the BBC has not taken any action over some of the criticisms levelled at it. What comes next for the BBC is partly they need to find replacements, obviously, for Deborah Tarnes and Tim Davie. There will be further questions for the organisation about how they have handled these and other issues. Samir Shah, in his letter to parliamentarians, confirms actually that reporting around all of this in recent days has led to hundreds of new complaints against the BBC, which he says the BBC is now investigating in the normal way. So that is one of the things that the BBC, the corporation, will have to handle in the days and weeks ahead. There is the political dimension to all of this as well. The Prime Minister's spokesman has today said that the Prime Minister doesn't believe that the BBC is institutionally biased, but the Prime Minister's spokesperson saying it is important the BBC acts to maintain trust and corrects mistakes quickly when they occur. Also, the potential for this to be politically tricky between London and Washington, given the way in which Donald Trump has been so exercised about all of this, and he has called the BBC corrupt. That is something that Downing Street says the Prime Minister also does not believe to be the case. Ed Davie, who's the leader of the opposition Liberal Democrat Party in this country, he is calling for UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to come out much more strongly and condemn the way in which Donald Trump has been talking about the BBC. It doesn't seem like Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, and his Downing Street operation are minded to move in that direction, but certainly moving today to push back against some of the things that Donald Trump has been saying on social media. And then more broadly, of course, bear in mind that the government is going to be negotiating the next charter for the BBC in the coming couple of years, and has said before it would look at the current funding model for the organisation and whether the licence fee funding model currently used needs to be updated for modern times. So it is a very challenging period, all of this, for the BBC, and as I say, political difficulties being caused as a result of all of this for Downing Street and Keir Starmer's Number 10 operation as well.
Ollie Barrett, good to see you. Thank you.